Start the record. Okay. I have your documents if you need me to bring it up.
Yeah, do you have my PowerPoint?
No, I only have the documents that you shared.
Oh, okay. No, I don't want to bring those up, but I want to bring up my, found it, I just had it, and now it's gone. My kids keep telling me, Dad, it's about time you come out of the dinosaur age.
Yeah.
When it comes to,
Okay. Here, just hit that share button. Now you're sharing your screen. Of your PowerPoint.
There's a strategy there.
yeah.
Just click that. And you're now sharing.
Okay, now I gotta go. Okay, I realized that I was inundating you guys with about 50 PowerPoint slides on those two Thursday mornings that I spent with you, and I'm not going to do that today. I have exactly two. 50. Here we go. I got that line across. Okay, there it is. Yeah. Okay, Tim.
Yes.
Tim is asked me whether we could have a kind of a group discussion, question, answer, reflection about the material that I presented. And that's why I sent out those 4 attachments, kind of as a foundation, in addition to what I tried to present in those 2 sessions. And Tim said what he would like is kind of reflection discussion, and he raised the question.
That's a spotlight, right?
Christian nationalism, and I gave it this title: Christian nationalism versus faithful Christian faithfulness. And I think there's a difference. I'm very much aware that there are people who are part of what is called the Christian nationalist movement, that is, in summary, an attempt to align Christian faith and Christian moral principles with governing authority, to get them established in national law, and so on. And there are, I am very sure, very faithful Christians who are part of that movement. My sense is that they really don't understand what the ultimate direction is and the ultimate result of that movement, in terms of both the nature and mission of the church and the nature of our nation as a pluralistic democracy.
Republic.
Pardon?
Republic.
Republic.
We are not a democracy.
Oh, okay. But with democratic principles at work through the Constitution. How's that?
Yes.
Okay. Didn't know we had a historian in the bunch here.
No, I teach it.
Okay. So the question that Tim said that would interest him and would probably interest all of us, and certainly interests me, is how, as Christians, can we respond to those who identify as Christian nationalists, who have this drive, this sense of calling or of divine mandate to install Christian principles and understandings of human life and Christian moral principles, and if possible, to install them into national law.
So this is just a fun question.
Yes.
If you take the principles of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, would you call him a Christian nationalist?
No.
Most of, well, I'll just say from the people that I know, they espouse Dr. King's principles. So when you paint the Christian nationalist brush, you would say that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King is a Christian nationalist.
That's kind of actually, to start to jump in the middle here, I kind of go back to what he was saying about the pigs. If you're talking about 100,000 pigs versus 3 million pigs, you're not talking about a large selection of pigs.
Yeah.
So the thing in my mind is, we can certainly define Christian nationalism as a negative thing. I think we would see it as a negative thing. I mean, what percentage or what leaders do we know of that are actually saying, I am a Christian nationalist? Because Nazis said, I'm a Nazi, right? Like, people will tell you what they are if you listen. And I'm just wondering are we talking about, we think that we have a problem with 2% of our population, or do we think we have a problem with 40% of our population? And I think that, to me, it's one thing to hear how bad this is, because it is bad. Your church goes before state. It has to go before state. If it doesn't, in my opinion, you're not a Christian. But are we talking about how we think 40% of the people in the country think, or how we think 2% of the country thinks? Because that makes a huge difference. And that was my question,
Yeah.
about what everybody thinks about that.
And I think that's an important question. That's why I said there are a lot of faithful Christians that I would define, and the literature as it has come out in the last 20 years, and a number of significant books. One of the books that I recommended is a recent one. It just came out in 23.
But I
The
think,
Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory.
but I think there's a key distinction between people who self-identify as Christian nationalists and those who are labeled Christian nationalists.
So I'd like to hear some more about what you were making the comparison of,
If you look at the letters from a Birmingham jail,
yeah.
what Reverend Dr. King was espousing, is how people should be treated,
Right,
okay? They're Christian principles, they're moral principles.
right,
The laws should support those, the law should be treating people equally with those moral principles.
right. But I see that as a healthy Christian
Right,
call
yes,
to,
yes,
this is how we as Americans should
Yes.
live, rather than,
but people are painted with the Christian nationalist brush because they're white and they say these things.
And maybe they're conservative.
Yeah,
but I think the difference that I would see between the two, and it's been a long time since I've read segments of letter from Birmingham jail, is that King wasn't saying you need to become Christians like I'm a Christian.
no, what he's saying is we need to have these moral laws. People need to be treated equally under these moral laws. Your rights don't differ because of the color of your skin.
But I think at least some of the Christian nationalists were painting with a pretty broad brush, whether it's 2% or 40%, is you need to. What did you just say? Losing the train of thought here.
What's the moral law? Being treated equally under a moral law.
Right. I think there's undercurrent of Christian nationalism, that is, some of it should be treated with more privilege than others. That it's a, you know,
And again,
stratified
and this is where,
society rather than saying this is what we should all be doing.
this is where you get to the self-identifier label question. So when you're dealing with Christian nationalists, understand the distinction. Because to many people, I'm a racist, but yet I spend most of my time working on a nonprofit in North Philadelphia, lifting people of color out of poverty. So I'm a bit racist because of some of my beliefs, but that's what I do.
But on what basis would people call you a racist? On what basis? Because you're white?
Because A, I'm white, I'm conservative, I'm Christian, I believe in the Second Amendment. I'm a former board member of the National Rifle Association.
So that's their problem. more
I
than
have
your
been called a
Yeah, sure.
racist
Yeah,
more times than I can, that I just, it bounces off me. I've been called a Christian nationalist, but I believe in Reverend Leon Sullivan's mission of self-help. I believe in Reverend Dr. King's moral, people should be treated equally under a moral set of laws.
so I'd say that's their problem.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing I'm asking.
Grouping too many people together.
And that's the thing I'm asking us to do as we talk about Christian nationalism, to recognize the difference between self-identified, who, by the way, I view those people as problematic or labeled. And many of the labeled, they say, oh, this is massive movement. It's labeled as a massive movement because they're the internal boogeyman. And it is advancing other agendas to label people like that.
Yeah, if I could pick up on it, I appreciate your describing what you believe, and I think the question that Manfred asked was, how would we respond to Christian nationalists? I think we should not be responding to them. I think we should be asking the question, what do you believe? Of each individual person, and try to understand them and then listen. Respond by listening.
Yes.
And so thank you for, and I would say I'm a racist. I think frankly, my definition of racism is we're all racist.
I don't like English people very much.
I know. And I was brought up to not like the French, you know, it's like, what can I say? It's kind of, but definition of racist is just, so many of these words are just loaded with the press and, you know, these echo chambers. So I think listening to people is powerful. What they believe.
I just recently read all of the letters from prison just recently. I've never read all of them. And what came through to me was, this is authentic Christian faith.
Yes.
That incorporates the total reality of human life and human institutions, and speaks a word of faithfulness and divine calling. Justice, let justice roll down like rivers and ever-flowing streams, from the quote from the book of Amos. And the interesting thing to me is that as I was reading those letters, this is the total opposite of the way in which Christian nationalism is defined.
The self-identified.
Right.
So
My view on how we should.
One more thing, the question that Whit asked, percentage-wise, the whole thing, you know? It became clear, for example, the first election in 2016, when Trump became president, that whole campaign was filled with ideology and verbiage and language that was the veritable opposite of the kinds of things that Martin Luther King was talking about. And just recently, and during that time, probably some of the best polling organizations, Pew Foundation in, I think, located in Philadelphia, and the Barna, it's a Christian organization that does all the polling, indicated that self-described evangelicals, 82% of self-identified evangelicals voted for Trump. In spite of all the things that he was affirming, and just recently at the CPAC conference, where Steve Bannon was one of the presenters, I almost wanted to take a shower after I finished listening to him. The kind of vitriol and hatred that came out of his mouth. And there were many leading, quote unquote, self-identified evangelical leaders who are part of that CPAC emphasis, which is, and I'll give you a bunch of quotes from people who spoke there at that conference. That to me was the definition of Christian nationalism. That is the attempt to align, or rather to
Co-opt.
to make Christian faith
Yeah.
and to align it with federal and state laws, which would disenfranchise really many others who are not part of this faith, and the whole question of the first constitution.
Well, I think
First Amendment.
I think that's a big part of misunderstanding some of the founding. Because remember that
Yeah, right.
in England, the king is the head of the church.
Right,
And so the separation of church and state is to make sure that the government does not set religious tone. And I said, that's why I make a distinction between moral law, natural law,
Right.
and religious law.
Yeah.
Is that, that's where, the moral law, the natural law, those principles were what was part of the founding. And that, again, that's where there's a lot of the misinterpretation of separation of church and state is you're coming from a culture where the king was the head of the church, and we don't want that. We want the church to be the church and the government to be the government. And that trying to drive the church back into government is a mistake.
yeah. And I think, from my perspective, what I call Christian faithfulness, communal from churches and individuals, affirms and recognizes that separation. It does not mean the absence of religious, moral, and ethical principles in the public life.
Yeah.
It does not mean the separation of religion
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
common life in our nation, but the separation of powers.
I think one of the things we have to do in response is know when, as strong Christians who practice our faith and share our faith and publicly, pronounce our faith, that we don't become co-opted by those who would take advantage of us for their own political gains. I thought some of Manfred's most interesting presentations early on, and the history people probably know this stuff inside and out, but some of it was new to me growing up in the Catholic Church to hear how, throughout history, people have used people of strong moral beliefs to suggest that the only way their moral beliefs can be accomplished is if that political movement of the time, whether it's, Constantine all the way up to today or whatever, wins, and the other is destroyed, and the other is evil or whatever. So, I would say our first response has to be open, like, Scott Bourne, just an incredible testimony of how he shared his faith and the practice of being able to open and listen when we were getting ready to pray right before we started. And Tim closed us off, but what I wanted to say was, as we were walking into this conversation, that we are not brothers like Cain and Abel, who, had this schism, and the one was, evil and the other wasn't good, but somehow that we are able to come together, recognizing those differences, but not being, kind of this good versus evil, and if we don't win, the devil will.
One of the things that I thought of in preparation, I actually took a picture of it, but I was remembering the first church I served. This was back in the 1980s. I'm old, maybe not as old as Manfred, but I'm old. But in that church in Lancaster County, we had an American flag and a Christian flag. And I don't remember where the question came from as far as should we have that, which one should be placed where, which one should be higher or not. But Christian Americans trying to wrestle with, how do I understand my identity So I walked over to our sanctuary last Thursday just to see where do we have flags, and I didn't see them. So as I was coming out, I talked, I was talking with Liz Wagner and John, I can never remember his last name, our head of everything that happens here. And yeah, they're side by side here in the connector. And I found that to be a pretty good solution. That it's not denying either my faith or my national identity in that way. And one of the quotes that Manfred sent around highlights from John Meacham's book, American Gospel, God, the Founding Fathers and Making of a Nation is, he says, the good news or gospel about America is that religion is free to influence our public life without controlling it. And I thought that's a good way of describing that. And then the next point you have, which is accurate, plus is kind of witty too. Secularists point to a wall of separation between church and state. So, more of a humanist separatist, there should be nothing the church does that. While many conservatives act as though the founding fathers were apostles in knee breeches. Neither extreme has it right.
So two comments. One is I've done work in Muslim countries. So I implemented the judicial system in the country of Qatar. So I'm very familiar with Sharia law and a complete commingling of religion and state.
Right.
So I have that perspective.
And
the other side is that I'll call it, I don't know what the right word for it is, but the people that use government as religion. And there are people inside the country who believe that government is the source of all power and rights.
Like secularists or something?
Secularists, I'll call it. And so that's where to me, the moral law is the middle way. So it's not laws control everything. You have moral law, you have natural law that comes from God. And it's not, it's balancing the two. But there are, I will call it religious fervor in certain groups for government control of everything. And not Christian nationalists.
when you were setting up the judicial system in Cater, and both then and looking back at it now, what are the pluses and minuses of that for either a smaller country or a larger country?
For one, it's individual making decisions. So you have fatwas calling for the death of people like the Salman Rushdie because they don't like what he did. You have the whole.
So the government's making the decisions rather than individual.
No, the individual imam makes the decision and the government enforces it. So you have religious decisions enforced by the government. So stoning, the murder of homosexuals, and I'm just gonna call it murder. The religious police that if you're not dressed appropriately, they beat you on the street.
Yeah, and I would call that Islamic nationalism.
Yes.
And my fear is, and from all that I've read and I've seen, that is the direction in which Christian nationalism is trying to move us.
Or at least what you're saying, some Christian
nationalists, and the other side is that if you look at the secularists driving everything to government, are they just trying to pull it back? Because you have to have the opposite to drive.
I think a helpful comment, that this is in the, did I send you a copy of the essay, The Dangers of Christian Nationalism by Paul Batson?
Give me a second here.
Paul Miller.
Okay, Paul Miller, that was from Christianity Today, right?
Yeah, right after the January 6th stuff.
Yeah.
That might be on the bibliography, but no.
And again, I will include all the documents Manfred's sharing with the recording from today.
No, it's on the bibliography there, under the essays, but.
Yeah, okay, so I want to read two brief paragraphs, which I think defines what stands behind what can be defined as Christian nationalism, even though not everybody who would be come under that definition sees themselves as Christian nationalists, okay? The author, Paul Batson, he's also written a major book on this topic. And he is senior pastor of the Preston Trail Community Church in Frisco, Texas. Southern Baptist Church. He has degrees from Southern theological seminaries, and he wrote this item in Christian Ethics Today. I've mentioned this periodical. He starts off by saying Christian nationalism. The phrase either makes you proud or it makes you cringe. Yeah, but he says there are two national stories, two American stories, two national stories are competing for supremacy in our cultural conflicts. Each one is about the country we love. Each one claims to correspond to the facts of history. Story one, America is and always has been a Christian nation. And there are some in the, what I define as Christian nationalist movement, who want to bring it back. Okay? Because we see a decline of the Christian population in America, becoming more and more secular, just like Europe became, especially after the First and Second World War. In the Netherlands, probably 20% of people identify themselves as Christian. That's a country part of the Reformation. So there's this yearning. Each one is about the country we love. Story one, America is and always has been a Christian nation. The founding fathers were devoted Christians who built a biblical foundation for the nation's future. God uniquely favors America above all nations. This is what I defined as the doctrine of manifest destiny, which really shaped a lot of early American thinking. Has blessed her because she is the chosen nation to Christianize the world. Government's role is to pass laws that privilege and empower Christians and churches so they can legislate and enforce godly behavior. So it sounds a little like what happens in Islamic countries, only from the perspective of the Islamic faith. The church's purpose, so that's the government's role, is to pass laws that privilege and empower Christians and Christian churches. The church's purpose is to return America to its Christian roots, which will in turn restore God's plan to bless the world through America. The image of the city on the hill.
So how many founding fathers do we think would sign on to that statement?
No,
Very few.
Okay. Okay, story number two. America is and always has been a religiously neutral nation. The founding fathers, religiously speaking, were a mixed bag. They did not uniformly envision a nation where Christianity was the favored religion. Among the founders were some sincere Christians, such as Patrick Henry, John Jay, and Samuel Adams. Some anti-supernaturalist deists, like Thomas Paine and Ethan Allen, and some quasi-deists who were favorable to, but not committed to, the Judeo-Christian tradition. This last group includes the most famous founding fathers, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. God has indeed blessed America richly, but not more than he longs to bless all nations. Government's role is to pass laws and to benefit the common good of all citizens. regardless of religious preference. The church's purpose is to influence Americans by being salt and light, i.e. speaking the truth and living in love and promoting justice. So those are the two kind of contrasting stories. And people identify themselves either with one or the other or with components of both. Okay. And Christian nationalism, he says, story one is the narrative behind Christian nationalism. Okay. But story one is more than just a narrative. It is a worldview. It defines Christian nationalism. It claims divine favor for America, for the American church, and for American Christians. It teaches a creed, a dogma, a lifestyle. It is an ism that forms and informs our political views, our religious preferences, and our purpose on earth.
Can I add one thing? Is the founder's goal was to create a free government that would not succumb to the all too common temptation to transform itself into despotism. And that's in both directions. The Islamic-based world I view as despotism, and when your freedoms are curtailed, you're moving into despotism. And so whether it's you want to tie it all to Christian values or tie it to other secular values, again, it's how do you keep that balance? And to me, is you got to put God first.
When you want to win an argument, the best way to win an argument is to be the one to define the terms.
Yeah.
And that sounds to me like the person who wrote that takes the second view, and so they created the first view in opposition to what they believe. And they said, this is the opposite of what I believe, so this must be the opposite view.
Yeah.
I would say that there are a fair number of people who would take the first sentence that you read and say there's nothing wrong with that, and then say all that other stuff has nothing to do with that first sentence. Because you can believe in Judeo-Christian values and not be a deist. And so our limited government was formed in such a way that the government wouldn't have to interfere the vast majority of the time because people all shared certain values. Murder isn't a crime because it's a sin. Murder is a crime because you can't have a society where murder is valid. And so I think a lot of our Judeo-Christian ethic has evolved in a society over 4,000 years of Judaism, particularly. We know what works and what doesn't work. I would say, like Frank said, Sharia law is incompatible with a constitutional federalism. You can't have Sharia law in a constitutional federalism. You can't stone people. You can't beat people up for not wearing the right clothing. And so while you don't have to, I think there's plenty of people that hold what we would call Judeo-Christian values that don't necessarily have to identify as a Christian. And I'm not sure any of the founding fathers would have signed on to either one of those statements. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle.
But he goes on to say that
Yeah.
there are pieces of that,
Mhm.
of either one of those definitions
Mhm.
that are true, but either one
Mhm.
as a total ideology has it wrong.
Great.
Yeah, that's right. It's,
Let me throw out something that is a little bit of a shift here, so if you want to come back, that's fine too, but if you're watching the Super Bowl and you remember one of the first first half commercials was Jesus, he gets us. You know, it's been a PR campaign to try to break down some of the walls that some people have in the church. And it was just multiple pictures of, as I recall, it wasn't a Jesus figure, but it was different people washing the feet of different people. And by different people, I mean there was different racial, ethnic, and skin color and things like that. And the closing line, I mean, the whole style of that advertising theme is present a lot of visuals and then just have like a catchphrase. And it was something like, Jesus was too busy washing people's feet to hate them, or something like that. It was that. And it was interesting that I read and heard two different criticisms of that in the following week. The one was from a self-identified Christian who said, $7 million for a 30-second commercial, and I guess they ran 2 30 seconds and one 15-second commercial. So for $15 million, how many people could have been fed, how many people could have been housed, how many people could have been cared for, rather than spending that in, corporate America? You can say yes, no, that. But the other one was, and again, I don't know if it was 2% or 40% or one person, one voice was, that they identified as Christian, but they were offended that they would be challenged to, and I'm paraphrasing this, so this might not be their words, but offended that they were challenged to show care to people who were different than them. And I thought, well, that's clearly more racist than Christian than that. But the point of that commercial, I think, was to say, if we're going to live as Christians, we should be washing one another's feet. Scott, whether it's a Christian or a Muslim or, same color skin as me or same socioeconomic or same political affiliation as me, if we live out Christian faith in that way, that's what we're called to do.
That reminds me of the story in the Gospels about the Good Samaritan.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus uses the Samaritan, who was theologically a heretic
And ethnically.
in the Jewish tradition. The disciples hated the Samaritans so much that they wanted to call down fire upon them when they didn't take them in the village that Jesus was walking through with his disciples to Jerusalem. And Jesus lifts him up as an embodiment of what God is about in this particular context, washing somebody's feet. That some people see that as contrary to, as you were sharing, in terms of who defines and so on. And lost my train of thought at the moment.
Can I throw something out there for a second, guys? I seem to be, during this conversation, reminded over and over of Joe Modica instructing one of his classes that we need to understand that we are citizens of more than one entity, that we are children of God and therefore citizens of the kingdom. And we're also citizens of the United States. We're citizens of our state and our county. We vote. And I was thinking about that and thinking back to the days of political philosophy in college and graduate school and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and the social contract. And the fact that my right to swing my fist stops at your nose. And what that means to me in the social contract context is that as a citizen of the state or the United States, I should be willing to give up some of my liberty. In other words, my liberty to hit you. I give that up in order to create a social contract so that you and I can live in peace.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say that this conversation and all this business about Christian nationalism, I get, I don't know, you get tired of the labels after a while, but you have to deal with them. They seem to kind of try to nuance their way around what I would consider to be that kind of fundamental truth that Joe is trying to point out to us in class about our dual and tri-citizenships, and the fact that we need to operate in the context of a social contract in order to live with one another in peace. I'll get off my soapbox.
No, I think so. I think you said it very well. The challenge is those that want to change the context of the social contract, right, by enforcing their perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's where the wrestling match. That's the point of friction. I think that's the essence of what we're really getting at.
If I may.
And that was baked in, that was intentional in the founding.
Yeah.
There's a baked in tension to both acknowledge the rights given by God to all humans. Not all people in the US, not all Christians, to all humans. But there's a need to be governed. And the genius of the founding was how they managed to do that, separate it vertically, separate it horizontally, and put a system in place where theoretically you don't become despots.
Yeah, so our Wednesday morning group is doing 1 Samuel right now. And we just did, with Ted, we just did chapter 10. And people said, give us a king. And God said,
Be careful.
all right, be careful what you ask for. If you want a governing structure, you're gonna, it's F around and find out, you're gonna get it.
Yeah, Samuel was like, all right, your king is gonna take 10% of your people and make them soldiers, they're gonna take your land, they're gonna take your girls, you're gonna, this is all the things the king is gonna do, and they said, we don't want a judge, we want a king.
Anytime, and to me, it's any government you put in that's not based on, God's values, you're gonna have that, and that's what we got.
It's gotta be ground up, not top down.
You know, and throughout the book of First and Second Kings, First and Second Samuel and First and Second Kings, the prophets are constantly thundering against the kings.
Yeah.
Because
Hey, guys, if I
they
may,
were not emulating faithful
Yeah.
Judaism,
Yeah.
faithful Yahwism,
Yeah.
you know, in their governance of the nation. And so, in fact, one of the chapters in my book, Abusing Scripture, deals with this question of governing authorities.
Yeah.
And there were German Christians that were part of that nationalist Christian church, Deutsche Christen, that were supportive of the Nazis.
Yeah.
And guess what? They quoted Romans 13.
Yeah.
God has established authorities, and we are supposed to obey authorities. But they didn't look at the other text of scripture where the disciples say, we must obey God rather than human authorities.
Yep. Yep.
And the prophets constantly thundered against the kingly powers.
So abortion, right? Just to do a hard right here. I think it's a great example of how people disagree on what they disagree on. I'll say, this is my view, and it's different than your view, when mine is an opposite. So people who are anti-abortion say nobody should have a right to kill anybody. People who are pro-choice say that a fetus is not a person, or it's not a person yet, right? So the disagreement is what we disagree on. There are people who would say that our administrative state, where our Congress doesn't even pass laws anymore, unelected bureaucratic officials create all the things that act as laws in our society, is like the establishment of the king. And that we want to go back, we want to reduce the administrative state and have the Congress actually start making the laws again. And get government out of our lives to the extent that we can. Government is there for certain reasons. There's a reason we have a federal government, but there are people who believe it's too big. And that the administrative state is acting as a king. And that might be why there was what some people would say an insurrection in 2016, because a guy nobody wanted to be president became president. The left and right have been picking who they want to be their appointed ones for 100 years, right? And a guy who was never supposed to get there, who said that he wanted smaller state, who said he wanted these things, you know, Stephen Wright, you guys remember Stephen Wright, the comedian? He said, I have a map of the world, it's actual size. Right, you can't have an actual size map, right? So you have to pick out what you pick out. The people who listen to sermons get different things out of each sermon. The people who listen to politicians maybe pick different things out. I can pick out something that somebody said and say, I think that was really good. Somebody else can focus on a different sentence in the same speech and say, I think that was really bad, I think that was hateful. And so I think in a lot of cases here, we just disagree on what we disagree on.
Well,
Interesting point, yeah.
some of us need to move on, me being one of them. So I'll take the lead. Do you want to have a closing comment?
I just want to, I want to make one comment. I would strongly recommend one of the handouts was on the most recent, what I call most recent addition to the bibliography that I sent out, is the book by Tim Alberta, whose father was an evangelical pastor And he grew up in that context, so he knows the evangelical world. And his book is The Kingdom, the Glory, the Kingdom, the Power and the Glory. I have glory first, but that's wrong. It's the kingdom, the power and the glory. American evangelicals in an age of extremism. And I think what I've read about it so far, and I've ordered the book because I want to read the whole thing, is that he's speaking from within the movement. He knows the language and the concepts and the ideology, and therefore I think he has credibility about those within the evangelical movement who are pursuing or want to pursue that goal of the privileging of the Christian faith and of Christian moral ethical principles within the context of our legal system, which imposes it on those who don't share those particular perspectives. And therefore disenfranchises them in all kinds of ways. You know? And so anyway, if any of you would like the PowerPoint
Yeah, you can email it to me.
text presentation, in which I outlined the historical foundations for Christian nationalism, and then biblical perspectives on that. For me, that's the most important thing, that I think encourages us to a Christian faithfulness in the middle of a place where there are 100 positions.
So let me close this with a couple of things. One's a mea culpa, and I'm not sure well, obviously we could continue this conversation beyond this time, and I'm not sure what's up for next month. My mistake, and I'm not sure I contacted Chris Holland and Sean James ahead of time, so I have sent out to them. I'm hoping they'll be here in March, but maybe not. So maybe we have some more weeks to fill if we want to do this. That's the first. The second is I was talking to a member of Bryn Mawr Press who is just finishing I don't know if it's a men's series or adult series on looking at the different heresies throughout church history. And the book they're using closes with saying each of those heresies had some truth in it. It just was out of balance. And it's a caution to me and to us that says when we're looking at any other movement within the Christian church, can turn the tables. What would people see if they looked at me? Where is my life, my faith out of balance or something like that? So that when we're, there's some different views of Christian nationalism, even in our grouping here, but you know, it's easy for me to point out the mistakes of other Christians. I need to be willing to say to others, show me where my faith or my Christian practice is out of balance, so that we're not just stone throwers against others. So thank you, Manfred, for both planting seeds back in January, but allowing us to help nurture them, and stay tuned on what happens for March. And let me close this in prayer. Lord, we continue to be amazed at how much you love us and how much you want to be a part of our daily life, and how you rejoice when we live in a faithful way to our calling as sons and daughters of the King. Help us to know how to do that in a way that is compassionate, is evangelical in the sense of communicating the evangel, the good news. Help us to be humble enough to receive critique and criticism from others. Help us to be charitable when we look at our brothers and sisters that we think have gotten out of balance. Help us to love them. Help us to be people that when others see us and come in contact with us, they say, look at how they love. Send us forth with a mission this day to share that love with those we come in contact with in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.